There's an awful lot of people within the Christian community that are excited about the idea that we might be living in the end times, especially within the evangelical communities. They use things like the bombing of Iran and the fact that we're actually now at a full-blown war with them as proof that God is about to come back, that the rapture could be happening at any moment now. On the other hand, they'll turn around and say that the LGBT people existing, acceptance of them and stuff, is going to lead to the end times. And they'll actually get angry that that's going on. So it's interesting because on its surface, it looks like these things are a contradiction. How is it that we can be excited about us bombing people in Iran while hating the idea that gay people exist? If you look even just slightly below the surface, it's not that this is a contradiction in terms. What it's actually doing is revealing a certain level of bigotry that exists within the evangelical community. And even further, it's actually revealing that there are these deep-seated insecurities in the men. Specifically, I'm going to call out men on this right now, in the men of the church, and this idea that they have to be always performing, always masculine. This idea has been driven into their heads so much that if they fail at their masculinity on a large enough scale, that God is going to come back and destroy everything. That's not actually biblical. Now, the whole point of this channel is to kind of take a look at different prophecies and to prophecy deconstruct it, right? Deconstruct this stuff and show that there's actually nothing prophetic within the Bible. The book is just a collection of old stories. And unfortunately, these things have been given way too much weight, especially today when it's leading to such enormous harm. What I want to do right now is jump into some of these verses that are getting used to kind of perpetuate this anti-LGBT sentiment. So this first one that I have is from Luke chapter 17. It's verses 28 and 29. The Gospels are pretty much silent on this topic. There's no real discussion of homosexuality. Most of that actually, interestingly, comes from Paul, and I'll get back to that point here in a little bit. So we have this verse where Jesus is actually talking about signs of the end times. And he says it was the same in the days of Lot. People were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But the day Lot left Sodom, fire and sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. The interesting thing is that homosexuality was not actually ever really the cause of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, even according to the Bible, and according to other books that within the Bible that talk about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So, and second of all, what's actually happened here is if you read the story, it sounds more like there was like an asteroid meteor, kind of like just some rocks that happen to make it through the atmosphere and hit this town. So, of course, a non-scientific group of people without any understanding would take something falling from the sky as this must be the wrath of God. I mean, these are the same people that, lightning must be God, fire from heaven, there's a rock falling through, but that must be God, the stars are angels, like all kinds of crazy thoughts because they had no idea what these things actually were. And there is actually proof that that might be true. There's a town in Jordan, a tell in Jordan, where they found that a city had been destroyed, and there's vitrification in the sands there. Vitrification, or basically turning sand into glass, takes enormously high heats, something on the order of like 3,600 degrees. So what likely happened is something came crashing through the atmosphere like it does every so often. We have videos of it from Russia. We've seen it in other places. We have evidence of it from where it destroyed the dinosaurs. This just happened to be another one. And what's happened? Well, it was gay people that caused that rock to fall from the sky. So, I mean, it's an insane thing to believe. But we'll jump to Paul now. So we have this verse from Romans. This is actually the first book after the Gospels and Acts. So Paul doesn't make it a chapter before he starts driving a wedge between people. This us versus them attitude that he puts into people. And he says, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. All right, so this very, very wrathful God, because Paul is constantly talking about the wrath of God while turning around and being like, but he loves us. And I mean, keep in mind that if a woman were in a relationship with a man like that, that all of her friends would be saying, you need to leave this guy. He's so angry. He's so wrathful. He's going to do all these things and punish me, but he loves me, right? Like it's kind of a joke. It's a classic abusive relationship. But in here, this verse gets attached to, well, Paul talks about shameful acts with other men, so that must be related to the end times. But there's actually nothing prophetic about this, and it's just Paul being Paul. All right, so we'll jump over to 2 Timothy. And as I mentioned here, this was the verse that was quoted by Franklin Graham. So in my previous video, I showed a little bit where Franklin Graham was quoting this, and then he jumps straight to transgender people, gay marriage, and men walking into women's locker rooms. But here's what the last days are actually, according to Paul, going to contain. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedience to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, and having a form of godliness but denying its power. All right, so all of those things, there's nothing actually sexual listed in there. Yeah, I don't know how Franklin Graham was able to jump from that to what he did, but that is supposedly what it's going to be like in the last days. The other thing to note with these things is if you ask, when has it ever been different? And these things, we will see that people have always been like this. And then there's another spot that I like quoting this one too, with the exact same point, where Jesus says there'll be wars and rumors of wars, there'll be earthquakes and famine. When has that ever not been the case? Humanity has never seen a true time of peace. So all of these things that like people are supposedly so bad, it's just part of the human condition. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that we are suddenly in the end times. And let's jump to our last one from Paul. And this is from 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men, nor thieves, nor the greedy, nor drunkards, nor slanderers, nor swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. All right, so this one actually gets attributed to end time prophecy a lot too. But there's nothing about end time prophecy in this chapter. In fact, this chapter is actually talking about believers suing other believers and going to court with non-believer judges. And Paul is saying, aren't you able to judge amongst yourselves? Why would you go to unbelievers if you guys can judge among yourselves? And just to show how kind of crazy this is, there's a spot where Paul says, don't you know that we will judge the angels? So everything in God's creation is just terrible, needs judgment. Even the angels are going to have to be judged. I mentioned earlier that Paul seems to focus on this an awful lot. And the fact that this comes out of nowhere, he's talking about people going to court and suddenly men can't have sex with other men. And it's almost like he got to daydreaming about something and then suddenly realized that while he's talking about, these court things, like we can't be suing each other, but I'm going to drift off, think about sleeping with other men, and then suddenly, no, but God hates that, and I've got to just remind you because you guys are the ones that are thinking about this. So, yeah. And I'm not the first one who's mentioned this. There are people who think that Paul, the thorn that Paul mentions that he has in his flesh, may have been related to homosexuality. I could almost believe it because he loves bringing it up. That's what we have that gets used as end time verses. If we jump into verses that are actually supposedly about the end times, such as the book of Revelations, the book of Revelations mentions sexual immorality twice. It's not specific to LGBT people or anything. So in reality, this trying to attach end times coming and going, whatever, to the LGBT community is just insane. And as I mentioned, it's got to do with this idea of performative masculinity. I think the men within the church that hold these things like this, like the evangelical community, and what they're really doing is showing their insecurities. They're showing that they feel like they need to perform and show themselves as the toughest guy there is. The other problem is I think it comes down to the view of sexuality altogether, right? Sex is either for baby making, which the average American has something like 1.6 kids. It doesn't really make sense. That means on average, people have sex twice to ever make a kid. We all know people have sex a lot more than that. So, I mean, that one's kind of not true. And then the other idea is this old Roman thing that it's an act of domination. It almost makes it an act of violence. So rather than being an act of love, showing that a reunification, this oneness, this joining together, this act of procreation, it's taking any positive out of it and just turning it into an act of violence, because God forbid a man ever be in a place of being subjugated under another man. And it's silly, because I think it also shows a complete lack of empathy to say that a man could love another man or be in love with another man, or that a woman could be in love with another woman. And part of the reason I am focusing on men is because women kind of get, like, the focus really isn't, it's always about men. It's about men going in women's locker rooms. It's about men being weak and being subjugated under other men. I actually do want to jump to some web pages to just kind of prove what I'm talking about with that. So this first website I want to point out is actually from these first two churches will be from the Carolinas. But this last paragraph here, he says, as we see the same conditions that existed in the days of Lot developing today, we can take comfort that the glorious second coming of Jesus Christ is drawing near. When he comes, he will make the Spirit of God available to all, and homosexuals will be taught that they can repent and change. Jumping to the last sentence, then and only then will the homosexual lifestyle be eradicated from the earth forever. So this guy is from the Church of the Great God, and it's an offshoot denomination, but still it kind of proves the point. And using the word eradicated there is an interesting choice, because eradication, like, he's going to claim that it's in this loving, like Jesus is just going to cleanse everybody, but eradication is a violent term. So you eradicate the bugs from your house, that kind of thing. It's not a friendly term. Then we have another one on here's how men need to act like men. And this is from the Shepherd Church. It's also in the Carolinas. But this second paragraph here, so we need the same kind of ironclad warrior who bravely sounded the alarm nearly 200 years ago against the coming plague of feminism, but the world was far too foolish to listen to them. So there's a quote that I think is worth bringing up here, that feminism is the radical belief that women are people. So let's just throw a translation in there. We need that same kind of ironclad warrior who bravely sounded the alarm nearly 200 years ago against the coming plague of the radical belief that women are people, but that the world was far too foolish to listen to them. So what he's referring to from 200 years ago is this idea that women should be allowed to vote, that women should have any kind of freedom, that their husbands weren't the ones with all the rights, because coverture was still practiced at this point, which meant that all of the woman's rights were subsumed by the man, and that he acted as the one for the two of them. So this is actually, when it comes to freedom, and this is a very, very dangerous belief. And this is an evangelical church. So this isn't some like fringe denomination. This is what they're getting taught in the Bible Belt in the evangelical communities. And then just to keep it on topic, we'll scroll down a little bit, because what does it mean to act like men, right? And then this one thing, be on the alert. So going here, for instance, primary act of defense you can provide as a husband or dad is spiritual. When the kids want to watch a movie that promotes or even hints at homosexuality, you, brother, are a bulwark of faithfulness that will not allow that kind of filth into your home. You are the one setting the network password, imposing parental controls, having conversations with children, teaching them, instructing them, and being on the alert for them because they do not yet know how to protect themselves. Standing up against women, standing up against gay people, like it's all this performative masculinity. And the sad thing is that this actually leads to other abuses, right? Because if people don't feel like they can be themselves, they end up operating out of a place of pain and trauma and suppression and repression, and it ends up creating a terrible cycle. So the abuse gets thrown at the woman, it gets thrown at the kids, and this actually is just harmful from top to bottom. The other thing that I like to say is, if you can't be truthful with yourself, how are you ever going to be truthful with God? Right? So if we have to put on this performance all the time and we can't just live as people, it means that we are being false with ourselves, which means that we are lying to God. And one of the 10 commandments of 10 rules that God decided to give on the Mount, one of them was thou shalt not lie. Yeah, we have that right off the bat with here's how you need to act. And I do think that if there's anything that we can take from the LGBT community, it's how to live as ourselves. If there's anything that they have shown us how to do, it is to be true to yourself despite whatever BS this world or the world's religions throw at us. And then just one last website. We have this is across the country in Washington, this idea of Project Man Card. And it's this evangelical or white Christian nationalist. Sorry, these guys are white Christian nationalists. There's an awful lot of militaristic tone, like it's only military type tones. But in order to properly be a man, you've got to be out in the woods in camo, ready to kill things, ready to carry heavy stuff. And here it is. They're all dressed in camo, and they've got multiple pictures of this, right? So he's done this with plenty of people at this point. In wrapping all of this up, the LGBT community is not what is bringing the end times on. And as I mentioned in the beginning, there's excitement over bombing Iran because it means the end times are coming. There should be excitement about accepting LGBT people too. So the only thing this has really done is shown that it is a religious excuse to hate people. I do also think that if anything, that this should show that it is time that we get off of this idea of men have to act like men and this performative BS. And it kind of reminds me of one of the things I was talking to. I mentioned that one of my best friends is trans in my last video. And that's part of the reason why this particular topic really hits me, especially now, is because I've seen what these changing views in this country have done to my friends. But one of the things that she mentioned to me was that before she transitioned, she always used to have the thought, how would a man respond to this? You know what thought I've never had? How would a man respond to this? Why? because I just do what I do. I don't have this idea of I need to pretend to be something. And if I am doing the so-called feminine things, I don't really care. I'm doing what I want to do. I'm being who I want to be. But I think it's time that we as a society put these old ideas to bed. We are not living in the days of Abraham. We're not living in the days of Roman occupation. We need to let these things go. We need to move on because we live in a whole different world. And it is time that we stop focusing on the end times. These things are not prophetic. The Bible is not pointing us towards some great cataclysm caused by God. I mean, there's always stuff that could happen. But God isn't this wrathful, angry being that is standing over us just waiting to punish us. And we need to let this go. Thank you very much for listening. If you've made it this far, please like and subscribe. And I'm doing a video soon on the idea of traditional marriage, because along with the LGBT stuff, like, it's this destruction of the traditional marriage is leading to the end times. So I'm going to talk about that next. Anyway, thank you, and hope to see you soon.